Give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, first and foremost, we wish to congratulate the United States on the accession to the presidency of the Security Council for the month of May. We trust that, unlike the previous presidency, yours will be effective and impartial and objective as is necessary for a presidency when the presidency is held represented by not in a national capacity. When the president carries out their duties, their obligations, and does not act in their national capacity. It behooves me to note for the record a number of remarks for the briefers. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Madam Vassily. I will not delve into the essence of what she has stated, nor her unilateral one-sided assessments. We have a number of questions that arose in connection to that. However, I wish to recall for both colleagues and the High Commissioner herself that according to General Assembly Resolution 141, which established the mandate of the High Commissioner, this official is under the aegis of the Secretary General and thereby bears the main responsibility for United Nations human rights action within the framework of the overall authority and decision of the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Human Rights Council. No other issues related to the question of the maintenance of international peace and security or protection of civilians fall under their purview. Madam President, for 2 months now, we have been discussing the developments in Ukraine, and for 2 months, beyond the flow of hostility, lies, deceit, fakes, hatred, and insults, we have heard the same old question. How could Russia have, unprovoked, as they say, attacked a sovereign, democratic, non-aggressive, independent, peaceful Ukraine? For it did not pose any threat to Russia itself. Among those who say this or who think this, I allow that there may be those who are sincere, those who may not understand what actually took place for all of these years. There are also people and countries who are sly, who have long dreamed of transforming Ukraine into a bridgehead for a battle against Russia. And they have done everything possible to achieve this since Ukraine gained independence 30 years ago. Politically, ideologically, and today they continue to do this by flooding weapons into Ukraine. What happened in Ukraine itself for all of these years will not fit into the format of today's statement, and it is unlikely that most of you will even want to hear this or understand it, as you previously did not understand and did not wish to understand this. We have repeatedly stated here in this hall, we've talked about things being lost in translation. You hear and you listen to the Ukrainian authorities in the translation, and they have told you, and they continue to tell you what you want to hear. We have listened to them, and we continue to listen to them in the original. Without translation, we have known, and we continue to know about their machinations, their intractability, their lies, their deceit, including before their own people over the course of all of these years. Instead of providing for their own state, there was an oligarchical, completely corrupt regime which flourished, and even Western sponsors of Kiev winced at this. We are aware how they attempted to create their own ideology based on a repudiation of everything Russian and everything and all that has linked us for centuries. You do not know, and you do not wish to know, about what insults and hatred was targeted against everything related to Russia. Not just at the everyday level, but also at the level of government officials and public figures. You do not know that since independence, absurd Ukrainian school history books have spawned an entire generation of people who have been reared with the hatred of Russia. Russophobia has become the main domestic national product for the Ukrainian authorities and Ukraine's main export. You will not find in Russian society anything of the sort with respect to Ukraine or Ukrainian people. You simply don't hear their slogans. You simply don't notice their torch-bearing marches. You do not see their nationalists and their undisguised Nazis. One intelligent person, a Ukrainian, Ales Buzina, historian, who was killed in 2015 by the nationalists, and he was a patriot of Ukraine. This was a crime, which of course has not yet been investigated, despite the fact that the murderers were well known. So Buzina quite rightly said that with the collapse of imperias on the borderline areas, there is extreme, blatant nationalism which thrives and is tinged with the deepest provincialism. And Ukraine is the starkest example of this. Today, this is not a war in Ukraine, contrary to what you may say. Contrary to what you say, this is a proxy war of the collective West against the Russian Federation. It is as if you were eagerly awaiting this moment to unleash repression against Russia. And if we are to talk about world war, then without a doubt, it is being waged at the economic level today. We have no doubt that you were preparing for this because the speed with which this was unleashed leaves us with no doubt that you were preparing for this for a long time, well before all of this transpired. You simply are basically morating in the finest traditions of the Wild West. If anybody here is unaware, I will inform you that beyond the countless sanctions and bans, the seizure of private property from Russian citizens who have nothing to do with this special military operation, Western countries froze accounts belonging to Russia amounting to $300 billion. What kind of international law are you talking about then? This is not even the rules-based order which you conceived of. This is not even colonialism when the enlightened West marched to impose civilization on its colonies, looting their national resources along the way. Natural resources. This is nothing other than the most basic lawlessness and plunder. So today, the masks have been cast off, quite simply. And today, however, it has now become trendy to accuse Russia of for the energy and the food crisis which you yourselves have created. For 8 years, we describe to you the suffering of the people in Donbass. We describe the shelling by the Ukrainian armed forces and the nationalist battalions. We told you about the deaths of civilians as a result of these strikes. We described that this was not Donbass which attacked Kiev, but Kiev which attacked Donbass, only because people there did not accept the coup, nor did they accept the policy of complete Ukrainization of the Maidan authorities. You did not respond. You do not wish to recall the fact that such protests in 2014 were brutally dispersed in Kharkov, Odessa, and that very same Mariupol. For all of these 8 years, we told you that this had to be put to an end. Very little was needed to achieve that. The Ukrainian authorities simply had to implement the Minsk agreements, which they publicly repudiated, using your patronage and support, and remaining under the illusion that they would enjoy complete impunity. They enjoyed feeling themselves to be a part of the so-called civilized world. They enjoyed being your vassals. Interesting, in the light of the current circumstances, are the bankrupt Ukrainian authorities deeply regretful of what is now taking place? And now, after all of that, after all of the crimes perpetrated by the Kiev regime and all of the warnings, a special military operation began to liberate Donbass. Now we suddenly heard desperate pleas. What have we done wrong? Those who are knowledgeable in Ukrainian Russian folklore will understand what I'm talking about. And I will respond to this question myself. This is all thanks to your Western sponsorship and patronage. You eagerly rubbed your hands together as you witnessed Ukraine's transformation into an anti-Russia. Everything that is transpiring now began not in late February and not even 8 years ago. This began long ago with the support and encouragement of the United States and their Western satellites. We've repeatedly talked about our concerns, our security concerns, and you in the West brushed them aside. You did not take them seriously. You assured yourselves of the purely defensive nature of NATO, at the same time moving the borders of the alliance right up against our borders. And today you are talking about the global role of the alliance, including in Asia. We advanced our proposals for global and indivisible security architecture. You arrogantly cast them aside, and there's no need to persuade us today about to try to persuade us that your plans never included an attempt, the desire to bring Ukraine into NATO. That was the case. If not today, then tomorrow. We had no illusions, and we have no illusions about that. Once again, we wish to reiterate and underscore the West has no need for Ukraine as such. Ukraine was necessary to the West only as an arena for confrontation with Russia, and Ukraine should also be under no illusion. The West will not help Ukraine only by providing weapons and in an attempt to drag out the conflict, and the West is already waging a proxy war against Russia. Today, we continue to be shocked, continuously are shocked by the hypocrisy of Western partners. The theme, the issue of the progression of the U.S. and the West in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yugoslavia, the ignoble campaign in Afghanistan, not to mention what preceded, for example, in Vietnam, as if subsided into insignificance. These tragedies, it is as if it is improper to recall these tragedies. Is it as if they never took place? This is ancient history. And the West here is as if beside the point. Of course, for there was a struggle there for democracy, a struggle for democracy. And yes, it came at the cost of millions of people, the destruction of cities and countries. And this was thousands of kilometers from your own home. And today we hear delirious rhetoric about sponsors of terrorism. I will, if I may, pose a rhetorical question. Where did ISIL come from? ISIL was spawned as a result of the U.S. invasion into Iraq, and its bedrock is comprised of former Iraqi army personnel. So who's the real sponsor of terrorism? Today, we are living in a state of an information, or more accurately, disinformation war. Its target is Russia. We have repeatedly pointed to the colossal forces, special psychological operations, which have been deployed on the information battlefield. The objective is not only to tarnish the adversary, but to disarm it, to strip it of access to information, to strip access for information outlets to the international community, and to accuse them of propaganda along the way. The international community needs to hear only one version of the events. The so-called atrocities of the Russian soldiers, the deliberate shelling of residential homes, and the murder of civilians, and the completely delirious idea, the genocide of the Ukrainian people. The West has waged a long-standing artillery barrage on the information field, whereas previously the information war was accompanied the real war. Now this has been reversed. And yet, the international community doesn't need to hear anything about Ukrainian provocations. For example, in Bucha, in Kramatorsk, about the way Ukrainian nationalists use civilians as cover, placing gun emplacements at homes and kindergartens and hospitals, near homes and the flats, civilian residences, the way they push them into basements, they do not let them out, and they do not let them use humanitarian corridors, which Russian soldiers provide every day. And if somebody is able to evacuate, they are often shot in the back by those same persons. There are troves of evidence about this from the Ukrainians themselves. You just don't want to hear it. Have you ever seen evidence from Russian prisoners of war, images of their being tortured by Ukrainian nationalists, which they then post on social networks. Have you ever seen anything similar by Ukrainian soldiers against Ukrainian prisoners of war? Have you seen the reports from foreign correspondents who Russian soldiers bring in to liberated Ukrainian cities, and they provide them with an opportunity to look around and to speak with anybody? Have you ever heard what people from those cities say about the Ukrainian nationalists' conduct and actions vis-a-vis themselves? I cannot but note that the Secretary General's visit to Russia and Ukraine was portrayed both by media outlets and Western politicians in a completely distorted way. There is, in this way, a deliberate impression created that the UN and Ukraine have managed to entice Russia to open up a humanitarian corridor for the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant. Incidentally, the Russian side has regularly been opening humanitarian corridors there, and they incidentally are open today as well. The problem lies in the following. The Azov fighters who are at Azovstal prefer to use civilians as human shields, and this is openly talked about by those who have managed to flee. Many of those, contrary to the mendacious allegations of the Ukrainian authorities, have preferred to remain in DPR or voiced a desire to return to liberated Mariupol. And today, the Azov fighters have definitively cast off their masks, demanding for each 15 liberated hostages in Azovstal, in exchange for every group of 15 liberated hostages, for them to be provided with 1 ton of foodstuffs and medicine. Before them, only ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra terrorists acted in this way. The permanent representative quoted Trotsky of Albania, Trotsky, who said that the army is a copy of society. Is this episode what you were talking about? Tomorrow we will hold a meeting on Ukraine's violations of international humanitarian law, an ARIA formula meeting. And it won't be us, but witnesses who will describe to you what they say. Ukrainians and foreign journalists, come and listen if you have an inkling of a desire to hear objective information. Thank you.
In my role as president of the Security Council, I thank the representative of Russia for his